I'm August. All right, now we're into the bubbling cauldron of sexual abuse. What a heated cauldron. Thank goodness. I mean, people are finally starting to talk about it. I was growing up in the 80s and 90s before it was really being talked about. The internet has really helped, I think. People just say things, and they might be dumb things, like we've all said dumb things on the internet, but sometimes people are saying really important things, and like at least Me Too had people like checking that box and going, oh yeah, I went through that. And I don't know about you, but I was surprised by the people on my feed, what had happened to them. Some of them talked about it, but just the numbers. And I think they were just as surprised by me. And some of the guys on my feed were really wonderful, because there's some really great men in the world. So this isn't about saying that the opposite sex, or if you're same sex, whoever, was hurting you is bad. It's saying that we all are damaged, and we all need empathy, and we all need awareness. And the bottom line for me, when I first started having to deal with that memory that I had in the desert, I didn't deal with it for 10 years. And then I would get into a relationship and I couldn't function. And it became obvious that I needed to go talk to somebody so that I could, have a relationship, have a boyfriend. And so I did. And I tried a lot of different therapies and therapists and groups and everything that was going on in the 80s. Man, it was a wild time. I did Bataka work and breath work and somatic healing. Somatic practices work really well for me, but you have to find what helps you. I'm very kinesthetic, so I think that's why somatics work really well for me. But whatever works for you is what you'll find just by trial and error. So I started doing some of these things, but it was so frustrating because, for instance, I was in an acting class. So I think I said on an earlier video, I worked as an actor. I made my living in Hollywood for a decade. And I got almost kind of kicked out of an acting class because, believe it or not, because I was able to bring up so much emotion. One of the students in the class complained, and so the teacher sent me, he said, you have to go to a therapist if you're going to be here. And I was like, oh, great. Okay. All right, I'll go. I went. The first thing the therapist says to me when I say, I might have been through sexual abuse as a child, he stops me and he goes, well, I just need you to know, whatever you say, I have to report that person. And so I looked at him and I said, wait a minute. Okay, this is still being the 80s. Wait a minute, I'm just exploring this. I don't want to accuse someone of something and ruin their life, because they would be prosecuted. He was going to report it to legal forces, legal officers in the town where I lived. And it's a little town, everybody knows each other. It would have been awful. And my family never would have talked to me again. But I'll talk about that in a minute, because eventually I did have to say something. And I mentioned in the last video that I talked to my mother with a therapist, at a session, and she just completely, kind of basically said I was nuts. And so that was no longer an option for me. But I did try to reintegrate in my family, but it was never the same, because she told my dad. And they never confronted me. They never said, well, if something happened to you, that's terrible. Let's go get you help. That wasn't it. It was, no, there's something wrong with you for saying that. And that was my family. And this is the point I want to make about this. My family isn't unusual in that. I deal with incestuous systems all the time. I'm in academics right now, and holy cow, it is so incestuous in that one person will say something and then everybody else will support that person, even if what they're doing isn't true or right. That's incestuousness. So we see that everywhere. So the family and the fact that a child might be used to deal with that power dynamic, it's just the way we all think of incest taboo. And incest taboo is a little bit different than just incestuousness, but the dynamic is really similar. And I have experienced triggers in several systems that I've been in, definitely religious systems, definitely academic systems. Financial systems, I've read about the incestuousness of economics. An economics professor talked about the incestuousness of economics, how they all pile on one thought and they just keep perpetuating that thought. That's how incestuousness works. There's a behavior and everybody supports it because no one wants to break the power dynamic. And there are going to be upheavals if someone tries to break it, so no one does. This is how children end up going through decades of suffering. You know, they grow up, first they suffer as little kids, and I've heard people's stories who suffered way more than I did, like physically suffered because of things that were done to them that were painful. And what I went through wasn't so physically painful. It was in a different way. That's a completely different discussion, but what happens is a mental suffering occurs. And we all know that obviously if you are being told something didn't happen to you that your body knows did, the body is where the wisdom is, then you're going to have a disconnect. There's going to be an incongruence. So the first thing that I had to learn to do was start finding some congruence inside myself. As soon as I was told that it didn't happen, I thought it was crazy. I spent a decade like waking up with suicidal ideations many mornings a week. I just thought I was crazy, and so I started acting out in so many ways. And things got really bad, and then I would see another therapist, and they weren't helpful, and then I would try to figure out what to do next, and that wouldn't pan out. And so what happened eventually is that I ended up finding my own way through, and I'll talk about that in the next video.